clickers here. Great. All right, thank you. As mentioned, my name is Sivessind. I'm in the Department of Entomology here at Iowa State. And we're going to change directions a little bit and talk about the Iowa Pest Resistance Management Plan. So as far as this this conference happening here, it's lucky I was not going to be in Georgia, so I get to present this here, so that works out. So the Iowa Pest Resistance Management Plan is a plan that's involving all sectors of Iowa agriculture to address the issue of pest resistance. So pest resistance management is the effort to slow development of pest resistance, pest adaptation to chemical, genetic, and agronomic control practices. We want to foster methods of early resistance detection and help slow or help address resistance when it does inevitably arise. So we recognize that we want farm or pest resistance management to be an integral part of farm business planning and not just a reaction after problems already arise. But to do this, we recognize it's going to involve coordinated partnerships because this is a problem across agriculture that it cannot be solved individually by a farmer or just by government or by universities. So this whole plan was started in a couple years back in the beginning of 2015. The Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, ISU CALS, and then representatives from all the different sectors within Iowa agriculture got together and decided that we needed to try to address the increasing problem of pest resistance within the state. But in order to do so, it was going to require participation and coordination across all members or across all sectors of Iowa agriculture. And that we needed to have a codified or a unified, consistent message that everyone can give so there's no confusion about what we need to do and what the problem is. So at the meeting, what was kind of decided was that we wanted the effort to, or that everyone wanted the effort to be voluntary. We wanted to minimize regulatory intervention. And then it has to be flexible, it has to be adaptive because different pest complexes are going to require different approaches as well as different problems in different locations and different localities. In addition to, we want to, of course, base the plan on the most current, up-to-date state of science that we have available, but also we have to acknowledge that it has to work for farmers. We have to acknowledge the current economic realities that farmers face in order to expect them to change their management practices. Again, we have to have it coordinate across all sectors, industry, farmers, agricultural professionals, government, and university to try to work together to try to promote some of these ideas. So some of the major tenets are, besides being voluntary, try to reduce regulatory intervention, has to be community-based. These pests, many of these pests are to varying degrees mobile. A farmer cannot apply these practices on their own and expect to be have no chance of getting resistance because pests do not acknowledge field borders, and even if you're doing everything correctly, pests will move from your neighbor. So we have to get everyone working together and working at the same time at the same goals. Has to be adaptive to we're working at different pests, we're looking at different different realities according to how agronomic practices in different regions. And in the end, what we want people to understand is that, or what we were trying to go after is that we want to preserve the viability of these pest management technologies that people are reliant upon and people really highly value. Because we want to help preserve farm profitability for the long term, not just looking at short-term profits. So starting in 2015, there's a framework that was developed for the plan. You don't have to go through all these points, but in the end, a framework was developed and then a plan was written. It was approved last December and then officially unveiled this past January. So as long as it's a long time in the making, we're kind of just getting it rolled out here this spring and this summer. So if you look at the plan, there's kind of four main parts: the governance, state of the science, communication and outreach, and a set of pilot projects that are being developed. So like I said, we want everything to be based on those current up-to-date science that is available. And fortunately, a lot of talented, smart people have done a lot of good work on this. So we have experts on insect, weed, and disease resistance that are involved in creating the plan and are going to be involved in the implementation of the project, as well as people to consult on economic and sociological considerations. So there is consistencies between different, between pest management resistance, between different pests. You need to diversify practices and to try to reduce selection pressure. At the same time, there's going to be differences between weeds, between weed pests, insects, and diseases, as well as management practices in region to region and how people practice. we need to get the point across that there are no silver bullets. That if you sometimes hear the idea that farmers are just going to wait around and wait for industry to innovate us out of this problem. But anyone who knows the current trajectory of development of new modes of action in insecticides and especially herbicides knows that this is simply not very realistic. It's not going to happen. There hasn't been a new mode of action introduced in herbicides in decades. So there's a lot of challenges that we have to face. But the good thing is that there's also a lot of common ground that we can get through some of these community actions. Like I said, since we're getting all these different sectors of agriculture involved in it, in the end, it's in the interest of everybody. The farmers, of course, don't want resistant pests in their fields. At the same time, industry wants to protect their technology that they spent so much money developing. So at the same time, we have to recognize that we're asking people to do something that is not easy. There's going to be a short-term increase in input costs, in time, and management complexity. And what we're saying what you get for it is long-term, kind of preserve your long-term productivity and profitability. So as far as running the plan, there's a program manager, it's myself, that's responsible for day-to-day implementation of the plan, working with the committee, the science, outreach, communication, and the pilot projects, and then to also kind of keep the kind of the leadership of the plan abreast, kind of keep them informed of plan progress, and keep all the different sectors knowing what's going on and how things are working. Communication and outreach is an integral part of this plan. So this plan is not, a lot of the research has already been done. For a lot of these things, I'm not going to say we know everything, but we have a pretty good idea of how we can put test plots in and the chance of developing resistance is going to be low. However, what's frustrating for a lot of people is that the adoption of these practices has not been what we need it to be. And so we're trying a different approach. We're trying to approach and do like a community-wide effort to try to get people to get the information they need and get the information that they need to the people that they trust. One thing that I think is maybe not clear, maybe not all clear. It wasn't clear to me, at least. I won't speak for anyone else. Is that farmers have different sources of information. Some trust extension a lot. Some don't trust Iowa State at all, and they mostly go to their agricultural retailers, which, despite the fact that they're the ones selling them products, that's who they go for. That's who they trust. And so we need to get them on board and get them in agreement and have the same message that what we're trying to promote. We're trying to get the information out that it's not an academic issue, that our long-term goal is to protect farm profitability and to protect these technologies that everyone enjoys using. Many farmers definitely enjoy using a BT corn rather than applying a soil-applied insecticide, but they have to know that that is in danger of losing those technologies. So in addition with the communication, providing educational materials and developing resources and getting them out where people can get access to them, we have a website that protectiowacrops.org. They'll kind of serve as a central hub for resources, progress, news, information related to the plan. So a lot of the plan is based on this, on a logic model that was developed that was kind of based on kind of sociological principles. If we follow from back to front, the end outcome that we're looking for is slow development of pest resistance and continued efficacy of all these technologies, of the herbicides, insecticides, and traded crops that everyone is reliant upon. But in order to get there, we first have to have changes in use, changes in management and land use, which involves people adopting resistant management practices. So increased use of crop rotation, rotating modes of action, using cultural techniques to try to reduce that selection pressure. Before we can get there, it's going to involve inputs and changes in human behavior, including get the proper education to everyone, get engaged in the community so everyone has the same message, and so that people aren't hearing conflicting reports of what they're trying to do. Everyone has a clear idea of so no matter what source they go to, they hear the same message. We'll kind of reinforce what we're trying to do. We're going to support workshops and meetings and kind of work with people in the field to try to find out what the barriers are to adopting some of these practices. They may be economic, they may be a management, they may be simple awareness or knowledge. So the other part, integral part of this plan is the development of pilot projects. So these pilot projects are intended to be examples of successful implementation of the best management of these resistant management practices, and to show that is possible and that show that they work, and also provides us an opportunity to test methods in order to gain community involvement, to get the messages out there, and how we're actually going to get the information to the people that we want, how to persuade them to adopt some of these practices. So when considering different pilot projects, look at a number of different criteria, including the pest pressure, the impacts on farm productivity by the pest, current pest management techniques, whether that varies region to region, if there's a community in place that we can kind of tap into and leverage that for some of getting our information out. So currently we're looking at 4 pilot projects. Western corn rootworm resistance to BT-traded corn, which is going to take place in northeastern and north central Iowa. Resistance to pyrethroids and soybean aphid, which will take place in northwestern Iowa. Palmer amaranth and other weeds in Harrison County, which is far western Iowa near Nebraska, and resistant water hemp right here in Story County. So the first project is looking at Western corn and rootworm resistance to BT traits in north central and northeastern Iowa. So BT-traded corn the BT-traded corn that targeted underground pests was first available in the early 2000s. In 2009, Dr. Gassman here at Iowa State identified or described some populations that had unexpected feeding and were resistant to the Cry3BB1 trait. Over subsequent years, he showed that there's cross-resistance between 3 of the 4 traits that target these underground pests. The 4th trait, Cry3435, there's a slight amount of resistance, but it's very localized in a small area, and it's an incomplete resistance. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is we want to protect that last BT's Cry3435 and keep that going as long as we can because there's going to be, down the line, there's some new technologies, some RNAi technology that will come out later, but it's going to be a while, and that's going to be dependent on having viable BT traits available. So some of the factors that increase incidence of development of BT resistance include continuous corn. Because of the biology of the Western corn rootworm, rotation is a very effective way to break them up, but people, for various reasons, still plant continuous corn, which really increases the population. Continuous use of the same BT traits, especially single-traded corn. In those early studies where they first identified resistance, they for the most part took place in fields that had planted corn at least 3 years in a row of a single BT trait. In addition, just high corn rootworm populations. And so what we're trying to do with the pilot is get people to adopt these resistant management practices, including increased use of crop rotation, use of pyramided BT traits, and rotated with non-BT corn using a soil-applied insecticide. So we began to meet with, we've been to form these teams that we meet with the locals in the area. We're working with agronomists and crop advisors, seed dealers, and we're starting to talk to the agricultural retailers and finding out the barriers to implementing some of these practices that I was referring to. The soybean aphid resistance to pyrethroids is this is a different project. This is more of an emerging threat. Instead of an established one, this is one that's kind of on the horizon. Resistance to pyrethroids and soybean aphid has been documented in Minnesota, southwestern and western Minnesota over the past few years, and is just starting to move down in Iowa. There's at least one confirmed case in 2016 in northwest Iowa, and there's limited insecticides that are available to use. Really, it's pyrethroids and some organophosphates. So what we were trying to do is, for this one, is get educate farmers about the risk of pyrethroid resistance and kind of get adoption of some of these best management practices. So Harrison County, Iowa, was the distinction of being the first documented case of Palmer amaranth in the state. It's of course since it's all over the state now, but that has nothing to do with Harrison County. So it was introduced in Harrison County as a byproduct of corn processing, and those populations are actually still there. So we're trying to look at, that's why that location was chosen. And then we have a kind of like an enthusiastic local farmer that's kind of serving as the champion of this project. And we have a bunch of, at the moment we have a survey that has gone out to local farmers to gauge both awareness and interest in these issues, as well as there's an event just this past Monday that kind of served as a rollout of the project and kind of recruit more participation in the project. We've currently got a pretty broad section. We've got, in addition to the farmers and the local agronomists, we have agricultural retailers and seed dealers, as well as lenders, because that's an important piece that we have to address as well. Let's see if I forgot anything with that. In addition, we're kind of also playing with the idea so since these projects are supposed to be largely run at the grassroots level, not dictated down from above, because we don't want it to be something that as soon as Iowa State steps away, everyone drops their practices. We want it to be kind of a process that's led from the localities that we're doing them. So at their interest, we're also looking to include some other herbicide-resistant weeds, including water hemp, horseweed, and giant ragweed. So the second weed project and the last of these 4 pilots involves herbicide-resistant water hemp, which is widespread in Story County, as it is Iowa and the whole entire Corn Belt, where herbicide resistance is extremely common. At this point, multiple herbicide resistances are more the rule rather than the exception. And so it's a problem in corn and especially in soybean production because there's limited options available. Even when people are trying to rotate herbicides as much as they can, whether if you have an unusually dry form after a pre-emergence herbicide was put on, that can really cause problems. So in addition to, so Story County was chosen for not only its convenient in the location near Iowa State, but also that there's a lot of there's many seed companies that have a lot of high involvement in the area, and so we're bringing them on board because they definitely have a lot of clout with a lot of people, and so we get them on board, and they're interested, and they are coming up with ideas that we can kind of engage with farmers and agronomists as well. So as we're trying to engage with these communities and get them going, this is a figure from a book called Diffusions of Innovations by Rogers, where it kind of it's just kind of a figure that kind of shows who, as people are adopting new technologies or new ideas. So the people that we are going for are going to be, we're at this stage right down here. We're trying to get what they call the innovators. These are the people who are who go out and seek knowledge, who are the first people to try things. They're not the mean, but they are the people that are early to try things. We get them first and get them on board, and then we kind of move into more in the general population as the idea starts rolling. So a lot of people involved in this for a couple of years. You have many people from here at Iowa State, with Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, as well as corn growers, Iowa Soybean Association, and the technology companies as well. All right, so that's it.
Do we have any questions?
Michelle?
Yeah.
So you talk a lot about looking at early adopters and that sort of thing, but have you considered your own technology, like using Twitter and not just web pages or social media and that sort of thing, because you will attract, I think, different generations of people in the farming community that might spread your word better?
True. No, I mean, and that's a good point. So much that I say with that, we are not only, I guess, in some ways targeting those innovators, those people that'll be initially involved in it, but at the other time, they'll kind of self-select for that. Whether we try it or not, those are going to be the first people on board. At the same time, we want to try to target, kind of like a broad cross-section of the people out there. So we're not only using more technology, Twitter and social media and everything else, but we also want to hit some of the old school things. We want to hit the coffee shops. You want to use kind of those on-field days so we can get everyone at least to be familiar with it, so then when they start hearing it, usually takes a few times of hearing an idea before you'll accept it. So, yeah. Yes?
Hi, I'm going to use a racetrack metaphor.
Okay.
How are you going to fight against this case? And, if you go to a racetrack, somebody will tell you that they hit the trifecta and they got so much money, but they never tell you how many races they had to bet on, lose, to make that trifecta. Well, if you go to the coffee shops, which we brought
Mhm.
up, there's probably always be somebody there who says, yeah, I just got back from the elevator and I got a yield that's like this big.
Mhm.
And if you follow other, but he didn't ever tell you that he used a ton of, pesticides and fertilizer and whatnot. He just tells you what the yield is. How are you going to sit there at the coffee shop and say, yeah, but how much did it cost you to produce that? They'll never tell you that.
No, it's true, and there is some degree that we have to try to get around this. There's some degree of reluctance among farmers. They'll talk about yield, but they don't really want to talk all the time about the financial part of it. Or they might be protective of how they're getting there. Everyone wants to have the cleanest field. They want to have the highest yield of, compared to their farmers. But they might share that information. They might not, depending on how open they are, how well they trust the people that they're with. And so I guess your question's as far as getting false information out?
Well, it's not necessarily false information. It's incomplete information.
Sure.
I mean, how can you create a visual that says that you can be there at the coffee shop and say, well, he says he got 40, bushels an acre.
Mm.
Well, to get 40 bushels an acre, we, as in an experimental plot, had to put this amount of stuff down, and it cost us this, so we realized at the end only 20 bushels an acre worth of profit.
Mm-hmm. I mean, people are going to listen to the people that they trust, I guess. So, part of what we're trying to do is trying to get to identify some of those key influencers that do have that ability to spread their information. And if they're on board with us, then we can kind of expand out. And then when people see their neighbors, their relatives that are, say we get one guy that's bought in, maybe his brother farms also, and he can get that information out to him. And so we are, it's a tough issue. I mean, if it was easy, we wouldn't be where we're at. A lot of this information has been known for years, and we're still where we're at. We're still, that's why, to some degree, we're kind of a victim of our own success. We have produced, the larger we, have produced, these technologies that have been extremely efficient, extremely successful, with widespread adoption, glyphosate-resistant crops, for example. But it's caused people to kind of fall into the easy traps of just, why put down a pre-emergent herbicides? Why, stop cultivating, stop doing other things, just to, when you can apply glyphosate twice. But then, of course, that leads to where we're at. So, yes.
Wait, my question is, you seem very interested in going out and talking to the farm co-ops and stuff at the coffee shops, and these groups probably naturally already exist, right? These farmers in the local areas, I would guess, probably already get together and discuss this and debate these ideas back and forth, like Rex was saying, like you were just talking about. So if they were willing to come to a consensus and okay, we're all willing to work together, is that something that then you as, and not you, but your integrated pest management team would be willing to go in and be like, okay, you guys are all suffering from SDS in this area, we're going to come in and talk to you and work with them as a team to figure out what's happening, and can they then come to you like, hey, we've got this problem on 5 farmers, can they come to you, or is this something like you have to go out and find them?
No, that's our ideal situation. Right, exactly. We actually do have an example. I didn't put anything in here where there's a group somewhere in Iowa, I'm not going to say where they basically found Palmer amaranth in their fields. They think it was brought in by a dairy farmer who brought in hay from Kansas and some cotton byproducts as feed from the south. And they kind of, basically they've gotten together, they've down the pipeline, they went to the extension agronomist in the region, he contacted us, that's why we know about it. So we were talking with them and kind of, I've been in some communication with them, and we're trying to strike that viewpoint, or that sweet spot between supporting them but not taking over, because we want the effort to be on their side. And so, but they're starting to, on their own, they got together, they are having meetings, or they're helping people out, they're loaning equipment, because they see it as an issue that's not just themselves, but it's a community-wide effort. They don't want Palmer to spread across all their fields, and so they're working together. So we're kind of setting it up where they do what they want to do, but then we have it very clear that we are there to support them and can provide resources or information or help set up meetings or whatever we can do to try to support their efforts. So yeah.